he called her and said he was going to commit suicide by a cop and he's coming to find you first. And that's when that other department finally got involved and they said, "You're not safe." And they took my daughter and I to a safe house.
I'm Jaimie Beebe.
And I'm Jake Deptula. On today's episode of Strictly Stalking, we're chatting with Shelly, who became the obsession of her violently aggressive ex-boyfriend.
After she befriended a coworker, he confessed his undying love for her.
During his pattern of love bombing, their relationship escalated, leading to the birth of their daughter.
His violent bursts of anger while drinking turned into an obsessive campaign of stalking. He manipulated their daughter and utilized his new wife to stalk Shelly as well. Shelly, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
What was your life like growing up?
So I grew up in the Midwest. My parents got divorced at a young age. I was about 4 years old when they split up. I grew up with just my mom and my sister in the household, and my dad remarried when I was about 8 years old, and I have two half-brothers that lived in another state but it was just my sister and I growing up. My childhood was pretty rough. My mom dated mainly alcoholics while I was growing up. I spent a lot of time in bars, a lot of time not knowing what a good relationship looked like. And I guess I carried that on to my adulthood and who I chose to have a child with. So at 23 years old, I got out of there and I moved to California.
What was your life like before you met your ex-boyfriend?
So prior to meeting him, I had lived in San Francisco for maybe 10 years at that point. And we became friends. We had a mutual friend in common. We knew each other through him. And I was working in downtown San Francisco. I was back in school, like everything was fine. I didn't really think much about anything. I was dating somebody. We split up because we had different ideas of what we wanted in life. And him and I had been friends, and my ex, he was married for a long period of time in an unhappy relationship, and they split up. And one day he came after me after I had ended things with my ex and told me he was in love with me and could I give him a chance.
What was your reaction when he first said that to you?
My first reaction was, I was a little scared. I was hesitant. Like, how can this guy love me? But we had spent so much time together. We had so much in common. And he seemed he loved everything about me. I mean, I guess going through therapy now and knowing the signs of narcissism, I guess that should have been like red flags going off, but I didn't really know any of that before. So my first reaction was kind of some fear, but at the same time, I was just like, oh my God, I've met the love of my life. Like, he kept saying we're soulmates, we're made for each other. Like, I just thought, okay, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the guy. And I was older and he wanted everything I wanted. I mean, he wanted to move out of San Francisco. He wanted to start a family right away. He wanted just a small, simple life. And everything I wanted, he made his. And I guess I thought that it was what he wanted also, but it turns out he just kind of becomes what you want to kind of get what he wants until basically he falls apart. And that's what happened next.
What was that relationship like?
I mean, in the beginning, it was great. I mean, we did so much together. We had so much in common. Like, I love woodworking and refinishing things. And so we were constantly like doing things like that. We moved in very quickly together because I had rented my condo in San Francisco to one of my friends. And I didn't have anywhere to live. I was living with my dad kind of part-time. He was living with his grandma because he had split with his ex-wife. And so we ended up just moving in together, and it was great. We did so much fun stuff together. Like, he was a chef, so he was constantly cooking. We would cook, we would clean. We just had fun. And, he had a history of drinking, and I knew that when we got together, but I felt like he kind of kept it at bay for a while, for maybe like the first 5-6 months that we were together. So in the beginning, it was amazing. It was like pink cloud, like I couldn't have felt more in love with somebody.
How quickly did things escalate in the relationship?
I think maybe about 5, 6 months in was the first time like I noticed something was like seriously wrong. He would come home from work, and I was living back and forth between San Francisco and the area that we moved to for a while. And I came home one day and he had just come home from work, and he was driving my car because he didn't have a car, and he stumbled getting out of the car, and it was obvious he was just like way too drunk to be driving. And then when he came in the house, he was slurring and he could barely walk. And then he was denying that he had been drinking. And then he ended up walking out. We had like an outdoor patio, and he was outside drinking. And being a chef, he always had a lot of knives on him. And he was sitting on the couch and he had his shirt off, and he was just sitting there in a tank top slicing his belly with a chef's knife that was probably like this long. And he was just sitting there just like crying. And there was a bottle, like a liter bottle of vodka. He was just chugging like it was a bottle of water, crying, and begged me to help him. Said, "I want to die. Please help me. Please help me." And I was in love with him. I thought I could help him. And I remember taking him into the shower and hugging him and washing him off and bandaging him up. And I mean, that was the first time where I was like, something's really wrong here. But I think growing up with a mom who took care of alcoholic after alcoholic, it was hard for me. I'd seen it my entire life. And so for me, I was like, okay, this is normal. I can make this work. I can just help him. So I think that was the first incident that really like threw me. And that was probably like 5, 6 months in. And I just denied the signs, and there was just like, after that, it was just like red flag, he would get mad at me. And, we lived for maybe 6 months in this apartment that we rented before I bought the house we moved into. And I mean, there was holes in the wall from him throwing a chair against it, or there was like food everywhere because he would like throw the plate of food at me. Like I'd be in the kitchen. It wasn't really at me. It was just kind of towards me. And I think that was the beginning. And, I wanted this dream relationship he promised me. And so I stuck it out, and my family, they loved him. Like he charmed the hell out of my family. They live in the area. And, he told my dad that he was an architect. He had graduated from Berkeley. He said that he was a French trained chef, went to culinary school. Years later, when we separated the first time, he told me all of that was a lie. He made up his degrees. He made up going to school. Like everything he told me about himself was a lie. And so this person that I fell in love with, that had all these grandiose ideas of what we were going to do together and who he was a lie.
I find it so hard to come up with new meals to cook all the time. And I hate getting bored with my food choices. So I've chosen Green Chef because they have a wide variety of easy to follow recipes with select organic ingredients.
Green Chef is a USDA certified organic company that makes eating well easy and affordable, with plans to fit every kind of lifestyle. I'm vegetarian, so I ordered the plant-powered meals. They also have meal plans that include paleo and balanced living.
Green Chef does the meal planning, grocery shopping, and most of the prep for you week after week. There's a diverse array of meal plans with plenty of options to choose from each week, and contact delivery right to your doorstep.
The ingredients come pre-measured, perfectly proportioned, and mostly prepped. It's perfect for my bachelor lifestyle.
And you can switch up your meal plan whenever you're ready to try a new way to eat. I really like the variety. The recipes even include pre-made measured sauces, dressings, and spices so you get more flavor in less time.
With Green Chef's wide variety of high-quality, clean ingredients, you can feel great about what you're eating and how it got to your table.
To order your delicious meals from Green Chef, go to greenchef.com/stalking80 and get $80 off your first month plus free shipping on your first box.
That's greenchef.com/stalking80 for $80 off your first month plus free shipping on your first box.
greenchef.com/stalking80.
Did any of your family members know the truth throughout this whole process?
No, my dad called him on it. Like he wrote him a letter when our daughter was born. And my ex could never hold a job. Like while we were together, he made barely above poverty. I completely supported us all the time. And my dad at one point, called him on it when our daughter was born, because he wasn't working and I was working and I was going to school full time. And my dad was like, hey, this isn't fair. She's supporting your family. You say you're an architect, go back to working, make a good living. You have a family to support now. So my dad, he kind of called him on it, but my mom was never really in the picture. And my sister, she's just kind of indifferent. So nobody really noticed anything was too wrong, and he charmed my family. And my family has always kind of been a little bit like, oh, they'll say that I'm mean because I stick up for myself or I have boundaries. And, with family, especially with my mom, I've kind of said, no, it's not okay what you do. And I'm not going to talk to you. If this is our relationship, it's not how it's going to be. So I didn't confide too much in my mom or my sister, but my dad, he loved him. My dad and my stepmom, they loved him.
Did you turn to your friends during this time?
Yeah, I mean, there was coworkers that I had and some friends that I had, and yeah, I would tell them what was going on, but some of it I didn't want to tell in the beginning. It's horrible to say, but there's a certain amount of shame that comes with like being in a domestic situation. You don't want your stuff out on the streets. And I remember talking to one girlfriend that I worked with, and she was very unsupportive of me having domestic issues because I wasn't supposed to talk about it. I was just supposed to, like, that was your household, work it out for your daughter's sake, period. So I didn't get a lot of support from some people, until I had friends that like were single moms also that had been through domestic abuse that were really just like, no, this isn't okay. You need to get out.
How far into the relationship until your daughter was born?
We got together in about 2012. 2 years later, 2014, she was born.
How did it change once your daughter was born?
Well, I think the drinking escalated. So him and his ex had been together for 14 years. They had gone through numerous bouts of in vitro, and she never got pregnant. And so when we got together, it was really the pressure of have my kid, have my kid, have my kid. I've been waiting my entire life to have a kid. So I thought he was going to be this amazing dad. And then, I went through 50 hours of labor, and when she was born, he was there, but that night, I hadn't slept for 3 days, and I was just like, wanted to sleep and, can you take care of her? And he had taken a bunch of Advil PM and was passed out, and I was literally throwing things at him. He was completely gone to the world, and everything became, she's your daughter, you're the mother, you take care of her. So it became everything was my responsibility. This was my child I brought into this world rather than it was ours. And so like really the aggressive behavior, it got worse. The drinking got worse. There was, forced physical relationship after our daughter was born. When I wasn't ready at a point in time, it didn't matter to him. He decided what was going to be what in our relationship. And if I had no choice of saying no in anything, whether it was what I bought for us for food, what I spent money on that I made, whether I wanted to have sex or not. It was no longer my decision. And if I did have anything to say, it was a blow up fight. It was retreating to the guest room, throwing things, screaming, calling me names.
Here's the thing about home security companies. Most trap you with high prices, tricky contracts, and lousy customer support. So while there are a lot of options out there, there's only one no-brainer. SimpliSafe.
SimpliSafe's got everything you need to protect your home with none of the drawbacks of traditional home security.
It's got an arsenal of sensors and cameras to blanket every room, window, and door, tailored specifically to your home. I have a lot of French doors in my house and feel totally safe and definitely covered with SimpliSafe.
Professional monitoring keeps watch day and night, ready to send police, fire, or medical professionals if there's an emergency.
And you can set it up all by yourself in under an hour. Just peel and stick the sensors exactly where you need them. No technician required. I set mine up all by myself. No problems.
And there's no contract, no pushy salespeople, no hidden fees, and no fine print.
And all this starts at just $15 a month.
We aren't the only ones who think SimpliSafe is great. U.S. News and World Report named it the best overall home security of 2020.
Try SimpliSafe today at simplisafe.com/stalking. You get free shipping and a 60-day risk-free trial. There's nothing to lose.
That's simplisafe.com/stalking.
When did you finally decide to separate, and how did that go?
So the first time we separated was in 2016, 2 years after our daughter was born. And we were at a wedding and he left me there. I couldn't find him anywhere. And our daughter, she wasn't even 2 years old, and it was probably like 9 o'clock at night. I'm like, we got to get back to the hotel. I got to get her back. And I finally found him, and he was completely drunk, and he's screaming at me that I was drunk and he was going to drive my car home. I'm like, no, you're drunk. Like, it's cool. I'm driving. He basically got in the car. He finally agreed, and we got in the car, and he jumped out of the car while I was driving and started running from the car. So I had to turn around, go get him, because it was like in the middle of nowhere. And then after I went to go get him, he got back in the car. He was trying to pull the steering wheel. He was trying to get on top of me. We just need to we need to have sex and work this out, while our daughter's in the back seat sleeping. He was just trying to force himself on me. And I said, no. And then he was just like, fuck you, whatever. And he got back out of the car. And that time I was just like, you know what? No. And I left. I went back to the hotel and was like, you find your own way home. You're going to jump out of the car while I'm driving. So he ended up finding his own way. One of the bridesmaids found him on the road and took him back to the hotel. And he came back and he was screaming at me. When he got in the room, he punched the wall, and his knuckles were all bloody. And our daughter, meanwhile, is laying in the bed sleeping, and he's throwing all this shit at me while she's laying next to me. And he's screaming at me, and he told me that he hated me. He wasn't going to be with me anymore. He was going to leave. And so he basically walked back out the door, and I was like, all right. And then he came back in 15 minutes later, just knocking at the door, groveling, and came in on his hands and knees and said, I haven't been honest with you. I've been doing cocaine. I found a dealer, and I've been doing coke, and I've been drinking a lot. And he admitted that in the middle of the night, he was sneaking out of the house and gambling. And he took out 4 or 5 credit cards and ran them up and was buying stuff and pawning it to get cash to gamble and do drugs. And I pretty much said, all right, cool, we're done. So that was the first time I kicked him out. He was out of the house for 6 months, went to rehab, was baptized. And again, my family was just, he's the father of your child. You need to get married. You need to marry him, and it was like, give him a chance. So 6 months later, I gave him a second chance, and huge mistake. So 6 months later, we got back together. He seemed better. He apologized. I mean, during that time, he spent a lot of time reflecting. That's when I found out everything he had told me in the beginning of our relationship was lies. The degrees, the different things that he had said he had done in his life. Anyway, we got back together, and I don't know, the first 6 months of our relationship were kind of similar to the first 6 months in our relationship before. He was diagnosed with being bipolar. He went back on medication. He was staying on the medication. He was going to AA meetings. He was sober, I thought, at least most of the time. And then his behavior started to get more aggressive again. I've always worked, and I work a lot. I changed careers, just before I turned 40. And for me, it's been, kind of catching up. And so I've always worked a lot, and he liked that I worked a lot. I mean, I would take him on nice vacations afterwards with our daughter. So then, basically things started getting bad again. He started screaming at me again. There was the whole, you can never change me. I don't know why you would think you could. And then he told me he was thinking about leaving me. And I was like, okay, bye. I'm going to be fine without you. I don't need, somebody in my life like this. So what really kind of changed was I started grad school. And prior to starting grad school, he was very supportive. He's always very much loved having, a woman take care of him. So he was very supportive of me going back to grad school because he wanted me to make more money, because that's all he loved to do was spend my money. He wanted to look cool, He wanted to drive the European sports car, and he wanted the, $350 sunglasses, which I don't know how many times I bought because he would throw them and break them. Or like his cell phone, he got my old cell phone every time because I was tired of buying him one, because he would throw it on the ground and break it. I mean, he was just destructive and disrespectful of things because he never had to pay for them. So I go back to grad school and I'm about 3 weeks in, and at my work, I just have a lot better setup for a computer. And I didn't want to be, if I was upstairs in the home office, he'd get mad at me because, he didn't want to be quiet. He wants to let our daughter, come in and ask me questions because he doesn't want to just have her for an hour while I'm trying to take an exam online. So I took the exam at work. I come home, it's Friday night, after I just take an exam. I have class the next morning. And all I did was I went and grabbed my book, and, I said, hi, he asked me how my exam was. I said it sucked, whatever. But I grabbed my book and I went downstairs and went to hang out with our daughter. And I was just going to read at the same time that she was down there and just play with her. And he was like, what are you doing? And I said, I have class tomorrow. I'm going to study. And all of a sudden it was just like all hell broke loose. Like he was chopping lettuce and he threw the cutting board on the floor off the counter. He threw the knife down and there was just lettuce everywhere. And he was yelling at me that I don't pay attention to him. I don't kiss him. I don't hug him. And, he just started screaming at me, calling me names. And I watched our daughter hide underneath the dining room table and start crying, covering her head. And I was just like, I just sat there shaking my head because, for so many years he just yelled at me. And most of the time I didn't say much in the way. I was always trying to bring that level of tension or aggression down, because I think that's what you do. It's like he was a lot larger than me and he would kind of stand over me and scream at me. And, he didn't hit me, but there were so many times he'd get in my face, and tell me I was lucky he didn't do anything. And at that moment in time, I just stood there and I just looked at him and I was like, get the fuck out of my house. And he started screaming back at me, it's always been your house. And I said, it is my house. I paid for everything here. I bought the house. And, you need to get out. I'm not the one screaming. You need to leave. I said, you need to leave right now. You need to just walk out the door and spend the night at your grandma's house. Go do something, cool off. And it continued. He just continued screaming at me. He was in the bedroom and he packed a bag. And I said, I want your key. And he was just yelling at me over the key. He ended up throwing the key at my feet after he threw the phone at me. And I can't remember if it was that time or another time that he picked up our daughter and was like, I'm taking her. And I was like, you're not going anywhere with her. She's staying here. And I just remember one of the last things I remember about that day is, our daughter stood up and he was screaming at me and she stood up and she pointed at the door and she said, leave, Daddy. And he looked at her and his face just fell and he walked out and I locked the door. So then after that, I tried doing co-parenting with him. I just told him, I said, this isn't working out between us. He would tell me that he was never like this with anybody else. He was never like this with his ex-wife. He said that it was me. I triggered him, that I was a cold person and I triggered him because I took love and affection away from him. And I would try to explain to him that it's hard to love somebody who's abusive to you. It's hard to be with somebody and want to hug or kiss him when he was sexually aggressive to me. I mean, I would be standing in the kitchen and it wasn't like a little love tap. I got my entire body groped on a continual basis, a consistent basis, where it made me so uncomfortable. It made me feel dirty. And I would tell him, don't do this to me. I feel like I'm being harassed. Like, don't do this. And he's like, oh, but I love you. I just want to touch you. And I'm like, I don't want to be touched like that, though. And so it became a big issue. And so, yeah, it was just, I don't remember what I was saying, but so basically that's just kind of what our relationship became, is I said, this isn't going to work. Like, let's work on co-parenting our daughter. Like, let's work on that. So I had class Wednesday nights and Saturday mornings. And I suggested, how about you take care of her during those times? So you can have overnights with her. You can either have her Wednesday night overnight or Friday night overnight, and then I'll pick her up. And then you can spend time with our daughter. And it won't be with me. It doesn't need to be like, anything that I was calling the shots on. It was, you have one-on-one time with her, and then I'll have my one-on-one time with her.
Shelly, were you concerned about the safety of your daughter when she was in his hands?
Yes, absolutely. When we separated the first time, part of what he admitted to me, not only the gambling, the drinking, but he was picking our daughter up from daycare. So he was the one that got off work early, and I would stay and work late, and he would pick her up, and he was buying a pint of vodka down the street, and he was drinking it before he picked her up. And I ended up asking the daycare people, and they said, yeah, he reeked like alcohol. Sometimes he was, like slurring. He would leave his sunglasses on when he would sign her out. And I asked him, why would you ever let him leave with her? And they said, well, we didn't want to get involved. But yeah, we knew he was drinking. And then in part of the letters that he wrote me when he was in rehab at that point, when we separated and when she was 2 years old, he admitted that he was taking her to hotel rooms and meeting up with his dealer and buying drugs. So he not only put her life in danger by drinking and driving and doing drugs with her, but he was taking her to see other people that were drug dealers in hotel rooms. I mean, yeah, I was terrified. And at that time, he was stalking her daycare. He would drive by her daycare and was honking the horn. Like, they would shut down, and like the daycare had like a safety procedure of what they would do if he showed up, because they knew who he was, and they had like where they were going to take her to keep her safe. So yeah, I was absolutely terrified of what it would be. But in the beginning, when we separated, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt that he had changed, and I wanted him to step up. I wanted to give him the leeway to show me that he was going to be a good dad. So I did give him that, even though I was scared. But once that all changed, like after Thanksgiving, when he started becoming more aggressive to me, I took that away and made him go back to the supervised visitation that he was granted during our first separation, and said, no, you can't be with her, because when he had her during those times that I did give him, like said she could just go with him, all he was doing was calling me the entire time anyway. Like, I was home watching my lecture, and he was just like, he wanted to know who I was talking to, who I was with. So he wasn't paying attention to our daughter. He wanted to know who I was talking to or what I was doing, which I was watching a lecture.
How soon did the stalking start after you kicked him out?
So we separated early November. 3 weeks later, things started getting bad. I filed a restraining order after one aggressive confrontation in my garage that he basically got in my face and again told me I was lucky. Like, you're lucky. It's like, what, lucky you're not beating the crap out of me? And I don't know how many times he said that to me, like, I could be worse. I'm not that bad of a guy. I'm not hitting you. Like, there was this complete, always this minimization of what he was doing. Like, I could be so much worse though to you. So after that, that was probably November, I filed the restraining order. And then December, he came to my house with the restraining order, the temporary restraining order, the night before the permanent restraining order happened. He dropped off some gifts for our daughter, and he called me and told me he was going to kill himself, and it was going to be my fault. So I ended up calling the police after, he just kept calling again and again and again. And the police ended up going to his grandma's house, who she said I was crazy. His family has always been against me. But she ended up calling him back 20 minutes later because she said he was just bleeding all over the living room, and she got scared. And prior to that, he had slit his wrist numerous times before they just bandaged him up and kind of, try to keep it quiet. But this time she was terrified, and she called the police, and they picked him up, and then he went off to treatment. So he got held on a 5150 hold, which got elevated to a 5250, which is basically 14 days of you cannot leave. And then he went to a 90-day treatment program, kind of outside of the area. And while he was in that treatment program, that's really, I think, when the stalking started. He was supposed to be there. He ended up getting passes after about 30 days in. And I was trying to be pleasant to him at that time. He had bought our daughter an iPad for Christmas, and she wasn't able to see him. She didn't understand what was going on. So I'd let them FaceTime. I started moving forward to move out of the area. Like, I always hated where we lived. Like, it was really far for me to work. And I had a dog walker that was there doing some just like things around my house. And that's when he noticed that my fence had been cut and pulled back. And so he was there like every day, and it wasn't always like that. And I had 2 dogs. They could have crept through the fence, and it was never like that. So the fence was cut and pulled back, and somebody was coming into my backyard, and my bedroom was right there. So I think he was coming to my backyard and just basically watching my bedroom to see if there was somebody else there and what I was doing.
How did the stalking escalate?
The restraining order became permanent because he was in a psychiatric hold. He was never served the restraining order. So it was never filed in the CLET system. They wouldn't go after him. So he took me to court in March for an emergency order to see our daughter, because he decided he was going to leave to go to the Midwest, and he wanted to see her prior to leaving. And he was given the restraining order there, but the court didn't file it, as well as the sheriff's department never filed it, so it never made it in. But then he left town somewhere early April, and then it was just constant. I mean, during that time before that, he was constantly calling me. It was emails, calls, and some of them were just like, I love you, and then they would turn into, I hate you. But then in April, I decided I'm not going to respond to anything, because I was supposed to, the restraining order called for peaceful contact with our daughter, and that was it. So finally I just said, that's it. That's all you get. And when I cut him off completely of any contact with me, that's when it really started aggressive. So he was across the country. He basically went to go live with my mom and her boyfriend, and he was trying to figure out who I was. So he basically went to all the places that I went to. And at the time, our daughter's iPad would sync all his photos as well as his iMessages. So I would see what he was doing. And he was just going to all these places that I grew up in. He was finding my friends on Facebook and trying to get together with them. And I mean, I have a message back and forth with this girl that I went to high school with, that he was trying to have sex with her, and he was saying it would really piss me off, like if she had sex with him, like we should have sex. And then she ended up contacting my sister and said that he was stalking her and wouldn't leave her alone. I mean, he just kept messaging her and messaging her. So at this time, he was, I would get the messages from him of like, I love you, please, let's work it out. Like, I'll change, like, I'm sorry I was so horrible to you. And then it would turn into like, you did these things too. Then it would turn into like, I hate you. And then it was like, fuck you. You've always been, I'm tired of telling you anything is good with you. Like, and it was like this escalation. And then it would go back down to, I love you. And I had no response at the time. So it was completely just in his head as to what was happening in our relationship and how he treated me. It was very weird. So he was living with my family in the Midwest, or with my mom in the Midwest, and then he decided to come back to California. So this was all very quick. It was like end of March or April he left. He came back to California in May.
When he started living with your mom, like, what was your reaction to that?
Oh, I was pissed. I was just like, what are you doing? I mean, my mom and I always had a really strained relationship anyway. So, but he took advantage of my fractured relationship with my family. I mean, he knew everything about me. He knew the pain that it would bring me. And so to me, it was just stunning that he would go to such lengths to hurt me. I mean, it was really just, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe my mom chose this man who was abusive to me over me. You know, I'm her daughter. I mean, I was floored. I was stunned, but then it kind of made sense. I mean, my parents, they got divorced when I was very young, and I've always had a lot better relationship with my dad, and my mom has always hated that. And she sees me as my dad, and he worked her. I watched the messages between the two of them that he would say, she's exactly the same, you know, because my dad was in college, and my mom says the same thing. Oh, your dad was only worried about himself and his education. He knew that about my mom, and he manipulated her. And my mom, we would have conversations here and there prior to that, and she would tell me that it was my fault. It was my fault. I sent him over the edge. He was trying to commit suicide because of me. Like, I should have dropped out of school and I should have fixed my family rather than continuing with school because he needed me. It was a really difficult time because I had, you know, my dad was just like, get out of there, get out of there. Like, my dad finally saw it for what it was. And my dad, you know, he was at my house. Like, when, you know, my ex tried to come back, my dad was sitting on the doorstep like, you do not come to this house, you know, and he was just like, you stay away from her. You know, this is my daughter. This is my granddaughter. You need to get yourself better. And then there's my mom that was just like, oh, her dad is on her side. I'm going to be on your side. And he called her mom. She called him son. And she's completely out of my life. She hasn't, I mean, I have no contact with her anymore. And he tried to do the same thing with my sister, but my sister was just like, something's wrong here. Like, I'm not buying what he's trying to tell me. So in May, my ex decided to come back to California, and he actually fractured his pelvis riding an ATV drunk in the Midwest. And my mom's boyfriend was pissed at him because he was pissed because he told him, don't touch my stuff. And then he drove it around and did a lot of damage to it, ended up in the hospital. Then he was with my mom. And then, yeah, he comes back to California, and he emails me and he says that he wants to see our daughter. He will go through the supervised visitation route and do it the legal route. He just wanted to let me know he's coming back into town. I was putting my house on the market, and I had plans to do it, you know, and he knew that I was going to sell my house, but I watched the text messages go back and forth between him and my mom, and, you know, on the iPad. And basically my mom said, oh yeah, well, her dad's selling his house too. And he emailed me at my work. He emailed me at my personal, because I'd blocked him on everything. He was emailing me at my work too. And he just said, you know, selling at the same time, you guys moving in together. And I think he thought it was funny, but then he ended up, it really, like, I watched him escalate in the text message to her, because my mom said, oh, well, what I heard about her dad is he's moving to Texas. And my ex was just like, wait, what? And she's like, yeah, he's moving to Texas. He's like, wait, hold on. So they're selling at the same time. Is she moving with him? She's like, I don't know. She could be. And like, he was just like, I gotta go. Like, and he basically said, I need to see her. I need to talk to her. And she was just like, oh, well, whatever, you know, just kind of, I don't know what's happening. Like, it's always been her little game that she doesn't know. She just kind of stirs the pot and then walks away and lets it explode. So he was emailing me at work, asking me about selling the house, if I was going to be moving with my dad to Texas, which I wasn't going to. I just ignored it because I've just been ignoring his emails this entire time. And then on Facebook, he posted he was on his way home. And I knew that meant he was on his way to my house. So this was May 31st. I called the police. I told them he's on his way to my house. You know, he's posted this. He should be, you know, from where he was, he should be here in about an hour and a half. I give him at midnight. He should be showing up here. And they said, okay, we'll send some extra patrol. And at that time, you know, the restraining order hadn't been filed yet. And I knew that because I was already calling the police every time he was harassing me. Like I had, call the police, I would get like a case number, but they wouldn't do anything because the restraining order wasn't filed. And that's how I found out, because I had called the police numerous times over him just harassing me. I mean, it was like constant emails and phone calls, and I knew he was on his way. And I had traded cars with my girlfriend at work that was taking care of my daughter for the weekend, because I had an open house. I had class the next day, and she said, let me help you out. And, she has 3 kids and she has a small car. So I traded my large car with 3-row seats so that every single kid could have a car seat. And I parked her car out front in the driveway. And just before midnight, he showed up at my house. Now, at this time, I was terrified. I didn't really think much about her car being in the driveway, that he would see it and think anything else, but I was terrified of what kind of shape he was going to be in. He had broken his pelvis, but I mean, the way I watched him jump out of his car, he jumped out of his car and almost ran up the stairs to my house and started banging on the door. And since I had all these messages going back and forth, I also knew the other state he was in, and he had started doing meth. And I didn't know how high or drunk he was going to be when he showed up, and I was terrified. So I was laying on my couch when he got there, ready for him, with a can of pepper spray, my phone, and a 12-gauge shotgun, just waiting for him. So he got there, he started banging on the door, and the dogs were barking. And I don't know what he was saying. I couldn't really hear beyond the banging and the dogs. And 911 just said, get where you can, you need a shelter in place. And I basically hid. They made me hide in my master bathroom, and I just sat there crying. It took like 11 minutes for the police to get there. I mean, I told them midnight. It was like 11:59 when he showed up. He was a minute early, and they were nowhere around. And they finally came, after I'm sitting there crying, sitting on the floor with a shotgun. I had never shot my shotgun prior to that. I was terrified. I had no idea. And here I'm waiting for, the father of my child to come bursting through my door. And I know that if he makes it through the threshold, I'm going to have to kill him, because he's going to kill me. And so I just sat there, just thinking about that. And it was just the hardest thing I've been through. And he finally got there, and he fled the scene. And because the restraining order wasn't filed, they let him go. They said that he was going 70 miles an hour down the street, and they couldn't go after him. They said it was a public safety issue if they do try and chase him. They said that there's nothing that they can do about it because the restraining order wasn't filed. So they let him go that night. Because of the photos loading to the iPad, I saw he came back at 3 a.m. and was taking pictures of my girlfriend's car, her license plate, and sent it to 2 of his friends, asking for the name and address of the car. He needed to know whose car it was because he was going to find them. The next day, I packed up some stuff, and I went to go stay with my sister. And my girlfriend had my daughter for the weekend because she was taking her for the open house. And I left the house. I just ended up leaving my house that day. And then the police, when they came to my house, they told me that the restraining order wasn't filed. They no longer had a copy at the sheriff's department. So Monday, I was going to have to go down to the courthouse, physically pick up the restraining order packet, walk it to the sheriff's department, and give it to them and ask them to have it served that day. So Monday, I take the day off early in the morning to go do that. And I go to the sheriff's department, and I beg them, please go out there early. Go out there early. He's going to be sleeping in. Please go as early as you can. And they said, well, we're busy. We'll do what we can. Later on that day, I was scared to leave work. One of my other friends was taking care of my daughter because I couldn't take her to daycare because I was scared of what he would do. And that night, I was done with work at 5 o'clock or whatever. I asked my girlfriend, the same one that I had her car, if she'd walk me out. She's been through an abusive relationship. Her ex-husband has stalked her, so she understood totally what I was going through. We became very close during the time, because it's hard to have somebody that really understands. But that day I asked her, please walk me out. I'm scared. She walked me out the door. We walked to our cars. We checked the parking lot. He's nowhere to be found. So we're like, okay, good. So she's driving behind me. We had this really large parking lot at work. And she is behind me. I'm sitting at a stop sign, and he pulls up behind her. And she just calls me, and she's like, oh my God, he's behind you right now. He's behind me right now. And so she's like, go, get on 911 right now. So I call 911. She's sitting at the stop sign. He's honking the horn at her to go. And she finally, he's about to go around her. So she ends up going. She's trying to drive super slow. And then he's like going alongside her. He's looking at her, I mean, she's a woman. She wasn't some man I was with that night. I mean, she wasn't even there that night. But he was aggressively, driving alongside her. And she finally lost him, and then he caught up to me, and I was already a couple blocks away. And I mean, he cut through like 6 lanes of traffic to get to me. And then I ended up like running a red light. I had to go around something. He ended up getting behind me and got out of his car and was trying to come to my car. I didn't look to see in my rear. I saw through my side mirror his door open, and I just took off through a red light. And the cops, I was on the phone with 911. The cops finally got to me. They got behind me to get me in a safe location. He took off, and the police wouldn't do anything again because there was no restraining order. But while I was in the parking lot, my sister called me and asked me if I was doing all right. And I had no idea how she would know anything was wrong, because this had all happened. And she said, well, Mom called me. He called her and said he was going to commit suicide by a cop, and he's coming to find you first. So my sister said, are you okay? And I mean, it was the most, even now, it's one of the hardest things to face, is that my mom didn't call me to warn me. She called my sister to make sure I was going to be okay. And my mom, she called it into the police department and said he threatened suicide by a cop. And she was only concerned that he was in trouble. Her son was in trouble. She didn't care what happened to me, her daughter. So the police department, they told me to go on my way, and they were no longer going to help me. It wasn't their jurisdiction, and I had to go pick up my daughter. So I drove directly to another police department, and my girlfriend met me there, and we did the exchange at the police department. And that's when that other department finally got involved, and they said, you're not safe. And they took my daughter and I to a safe house. So we went to a safe house for days until they found him. He was in San Francisco bleeding on the street, and they 5150'd him again and 5250'd him. And during the time he was in, I had a little bit of time to try and make some moves to find a safe place for us to live. And I never got to go back to my house. It was just, I was working remote at the time. My job was really great about it. And that was just kind of it. Like, as the stalking it escalated to a point at that point. And I mean, that night prior to when they took us into the safe house, he called me. He called me to try and reminisce how much he loved me, how much he loved playing poker with me years ago and eating quesadillas together, and, just try to reminisce, and told me how much he loved me. And then, I just said, you can't love me the way you scare me, you terrify me. And he said, good, be terrified. But this ends tonight. I'm going to kill myself tonight. And I said, okay. At this point, I was just so like, I mean, this was third suicide attempt at this point. It just seemed like a cry for help. The only person that was really listening was my mom. That one was being, sympathetic. Besides that, it was like I knew it was a cry for help, and I just said, okay, you know what? He said, you're never going to see me or hear from me again. I said, that was what the restraining order was supposed to be for. Like, I wasn't supposed to hear from you then. So, yeah, I hung up, and there was a part of me that hoped that it would be over that night, but it wasn't. So I'm making moves to move out of the area, sell my house. It's still on the market. I had to go back there and move all my stuff. At the time, I was throwing things away. I mean, I would go there, and I remember there was, I'm still working full time at the time. And there was a day that I knew he was going to be out. It was like, I know he's in for 14 days. So I have up until this day to get all my stuff out of my house. And I got everything out, and I left, my trash cans were full at the bottom of our driveway, and I wasn't going to be there for trash day. So I just left them there. And he got out later that day, and he threw my trash all over my driveway. And my next door neighbor that had just moved in has seen it. He's seen him do it, and took photos of him. And when I found out about it, he gave the photos to the police. He was questioned. My ex must have found out about it because he came back and he stole his trash cans and took them around the corner and threw his trash everywhere. So he retaliated against that neighbor. But then the other neighbor, she was watching my house for me. She was, I don't know, she was more like my mom's age. She was this really sweet woman, and she used to watch my house. And she would watch almost every night. He would come to my house and sit in my driveway or sit at the bottom of my hill just watching my house. And she would stand up in her window to look down at him so he would leave, so that he knew she was watching. And she was always ready to call the police. She knew that he might be dangerous. She knew that he was losing whatever kind of inhibition to hurt me that he had before. And then he went to jail in June for an unrelated DUI. But then in the beginning of August, he started calling my sister. It was like August 2nd. He was calling my sister just over and over and over again. And she was just like, he's called me like 8 times, and I'm on the phone with her. And then his mom called me and left me a message. And I called the police and said, look, there's supposed to be no contact here. And he was posting, and I mean, he would post things on Facebook about me all the time before, just like he would post photos of me. He posted photos of this man that he said I was with who endorsed me on LinkedIn, who I don't even know, like this poor guy. Because I was watching the whole thing with the photos, this was probably in June, he was posting all these photos of this man and saying that I was with him and that he was raising our daughter, and he was angry, and he was taking pictures, screenshots of this guy's address and directions to his house and to where he worked. And finally, I told my girlfriend what was happening, and she ended up reaching out to this man and warning him that there's this person that might try and hurt you, because his mental state was completely, gone at that point. But he kept posting photo after photo of me. And then he made this like photo collage, and in one of the photos there was this bloody arm, and I couldn't figure out what was going on with this bloody arm that was in the photo. And he posted my LinkedIn profile pic and said, congrats on working for home, LOL. And I thought, well, that's weird. I mean, I'm working from home, but what does that mean? And the next day I was at work, and I got a phone call from my real estate agent, and I was excited, like, ooh, I got an offer. And he was just like, I hate to tell you this, but your neighbor just called me because she saw my name on the listing, and somebody drove a car through your garage. I had my dog walker, who lived in the area, go out and check out the situation, and my somebody drove a car through my garage. He went around my house. He didn't go in it yet. And basically somebody had beat in my bedroom windows. There was a stainless steel dog bowl that was outside that somebody used as like a little hand shield and basically had beat in my windows. And all of a sudden, the bloody arm photo on Facebook that he posted seemed to make sense. I ended up finding out that he actually sent the photos to my mom, and they were time stamped as to, he just took them, and he had texted my mom when he was at my house and said that my house looked leafy. And she said, "What do you mean? She's leafy?" And he's like, "It looks leafy." And then he never responded again. So he basically let her know he was going to my house, and he went to my house and vandalized it. And it was right after he must have watched the neighbor leave, because she was always watching my house. She had just left the house, and the other neighbor, because of the trash situation, would never tell me what happened if he did see what happened, because he had just bought his house. He said, "I'm sorry, I can't be involved in this. We live here now." He was questioned by the police. His family went to try and cover for him, said, "Oh yeah, he was around." But he ended up saying he didn't remember if he had done it or not, because he was in a binge. He had been on a binge for the past few days and didn't know anything that was going on. So the police said, "Well, we don't know what to do. He's not admitting this. He's not denying it." So there was DNA evidence, which I found out later there was blood that was found from, he had punched out there was small glass windows in the garage. I had a spin bike in there. I would spin in there and it was too bright. So I put like window tint on the inside, and he had beat it out the window. And I don't know if he was trying to get it open, and that's how his arm was all bloody from it. But the glass with his blood on it was over 20 feet from that window. So the amount of rage that it must have taken for him to punch a window with window tint on it, is crazy, just absolutely crazy. He had no idea of the mental state he was even in when it happened. And I was terrified. I never even went and saw the damage. I never saw anything. My dad showed up, and at this point, I had moved. I went into hiding. Like, my daughter and I just went into hiding, and that was kind of it. Like, and that's what we kind of kept doing. I had been harassed, just trying to get the police to do something for so long. They just kept ignoring it. There was no restraining order filed. When he had moved to the Midwest, I actually called the county he was in and tried to get the restraining order filed. And they must have filed it at some point in time, because it was all of a sudden in the California CLET system. So they finally decided to do something. So the DA finally got involved. And when he went in they arrested him, but they didn't have any evidence yet. And so the vandalism was just kind of like, "Oh, okay, we'll get him on vandalism." And then the DA was like, "No, this is stalking. He's stalking her, and she's terrified." And they finally the DA, because the police wouldn't arrest him. The police were just completely, I don't want to say they didn't care, but he hadn't hurt me enough for them to do anything. So the DA went in on his DUI court one day, and she threw felony stalking charges, and he was charged. And he sat with a huge bail, and then court started happening. I had to go through court a couple times. They were trying to get all charges dropped, which, it seems like felony stalking is one of the hardest things to actually convict. And since we had a relationship, his family lawyered up for him. They said that we had reconciled once before. I was just angry. I was the jilted ex. And, it ended up, I got bounced around from DA to DA, and they couldn't get the DNA evidence back until basically we decided on a plea, because I didn't think we had any chance of winning anything. So in January, After he sat in jail from August through January, he was transferred as part of the plea agreement to a rehab facility. With a felony stalking charge, they told me he would get 18 months. And that was it. He was a first-time offender. He was military, and he fought. I mean, that's all I kept saying is he fought for our country, and part of his whole thing is I have PTSD, I have PTSD, like I didn't know what I was doing, and it's been completely overlooked because he is a vet, and, he's dangerous. I mean, bottom line is, yes, he's been trained how to use a gun. He's super dangerous. 18 months, which means he gets 9 months. They told me that I could get more preferential probation if I took the plea agreement of him going to rehab for 3 months instead of him staying in jail for 3 months. So I decided on that, and in January, he was moved to a rehab facility, and he stayed there until April 15th, and he was released then. And he just got sentenced in May, so he was convicted of both felony stalking and felony vandalism. I have a 5-year criminal protective order. He's not supposed to be drinking. He's supposed to stay away from me. He's not supposed to have any contact with our daughter right now. At some point, he's supposed to be able to go back for visitation, which is terrifying to me because I don't want to be anywhere near him or to even have to meet him at a place. And really that's my life today today I spent the day on the phone with child support. They want me to fill out, income disclosures of where I work, where she goes to daycare. And it becomes part of public record. I have a child with them, and it's terrifying. I mean, I can't get away from him.
What has happened since he was released from rehab?
So when he was released from jail in January, he had been dating this woman. There was a woman that came to our court appearances, and I remember seeing her, and she had a daughter the same age as our daughter, and she would bring her kid to court with her, and I was always just like horrified, like, oh my God, this kid, what is she seeing? But not only was I thinking that, but when I saw that he was using this woman who had a child, I reached out to her on Facebook and said to her, I'm reaching out to you as a mother to say, I'm scared for you. I'm scared for you. I'm scared for your daughter. And she ended up telling me that they were no longer together. He had called somebody else the minute he got out of jail. He called this other woman. And her and this other woman had talked and compared notes. He was calling both of them wifey. He told both of them he was going to marry them and make them the happiest women ever. And actually, it's, this woman, the woman that was in court, her and I have now become friends. I've seen the letters he wrote her, and they're the exact same letters he wrote me. I mean, he's just recycling the same, I will make you so happy, trust me, love me. And he basically did it to this other woman too. And she at first saw through him, and she broke things off with him. And then she decided she wanted that dream. So he got out. So they started seeing each other in January. He got out in April. They broke up, whatever, for some part of it. And then they got back together. And then early May, they got engaged, and beginning of June, he married her. And since then, I try not to watch what she's doing, but now she's posting things about him and our daughter and her are going to be a big family together. And she's starting, I think they're starting to try and make moves to get visitation or some kind of custody of, my daughter, who's 6. And this woman, she, I have a girlfriend, because for me, it's hard for me to look at her profile. I don't really want to see her. I feel a certain amount of sympathy because You know, in a narcissistic relationship, you don't realize you're just the next target. And so she's just happily thinking that she's found her soulmate. And I realize what that is, to have that carpet ripped out from under you and realize who you're actually with. It. You're actually the one sleeping with the enemy. But at this point, her focus has become me. I mean, she just the other day, she was peeping my LinkedIn and it tells me who's looking at it. So I see her looking at me. I mean, if I post a new profile pic, I can go to her account and see her writing messages basically to me. She just today was talking about how it's horrible that I can't just co-parent with him. You know, it's just like she calls me trashy. She says that I'm trashy, whatever. She says messages to me of go back to the ghetto and all these. And then she's, you know, my ex, he became born again at some point. And so now they're writing all these weird God things. And she tries to, put forth this godly image, but then at the same time, she's calling me trash online, even though, you know, I'm the victim here. And she's writing these things that I should pay him some restitution for dragging his name through the mud because I'm a liar. You know, he's got her so convinced that he didn't do any of these things, even though there was a mountain of evidence, you know, DNA evidence, photos.
Did he continue stalking you after he got married?
So it's only been about a month and a half. I haven't seen or heard from him. He doesn't know where I am. I have applied for a program. It's called Safe at Home out of California, where I have my address. It's like an address forwarding system. So everything I have of mine, like they teach you how to basically kind of cover your tracks. It's for victims of stalking or like domestic abuse. So, or I think like trafficking also, but so he doesn't know where I am. I haven't heard from him, thankfully. But at this point, he's been convicted of the felony, and if he violates it, he goes in. I think it's like 18 months, 24 months, 36 months. It's like, it's not, and they told him, they said, if you contact her at all, if you violate this, in any kind of violation, depending upon the severity, he goes for that amount of time. So it's been about 6 weeks since he's gotten married. I haven't heard from him. However, she has posted a lot about me. So I'm not sure if it's him on her account stalking me or if it's her.
How did you get involved with the Safe at Home program?
So I went through, when I was in the safe house, it was through Weave. I'm not sure what that one stands for, but so Weave told me to go through Safe at Home, and they said apply for that. I've also applied for another program called Victims of Compensation. It's, I think, Cal VCB. And like, you know, our daughter, she's, you know, it's been trauma for both of us. She doesn't really understand what happened. I mean, she saw photos of our house. She knows it was him who did it. And she cried and cried, like, why would he do that? Why would he do this to us? I mean, she knows. And at this point, I've worked through her in therapy with it, because at first I didn't tell her anything. And finally in therapy, it came out one day that she asked me if he was alive. And the therapist said, you need to start talking to her and telling her what's happening. And I mean, the therapist agrees that he should not have any contact with her. So if it does come to visitation or custody, I mean, the amount of stress and trauma it's been on her it's been a lot. But yeah, the Safe at Home I learned through Weave, as well as I got a family court lawyer who told me, you know, go through these routes. That's what I've been doing, trying to just keep us safe. I mean, I have the security cameras on my house now. I mean, my whole life has changed. It's like, it's scary to meet new people. One of the first things I have to tell them is, by the way, don't post any photos of me on social media. Like, don't post pictures of my daughter. You can't say, you know, if you know where we are. And I mean, one of the hardest things is like my sister, you know, she knows where I live and she still talks to my mom. And my mom, I don't know if she still has contact with him, but I wouldn't put it past her to tell him where we are because she doesn't agree with how I've I should still be in the relationship. I shouldn't have left. It didn't matter how violent he was becoming, how much of an alcoholic he was, how abusive he was to me, you know, or, just neglectful to our daughter. I should just stay in the relationship regardless.
What are the next steps for you? How long can you stay hidden?
I've looked into terminating parental rights because at this point he does have the right to come back and fight me for custody, which means I will have to show up in a courthouse, which I've been terrified to show up at a courthouse somewhere where he knows I'm going to be. Same thing with visitation. I'm afraid to show up so that he can see our daughter because he may be fine for the time being, but he's going to be looking for me afterwards. And it's only a matter of bad days before he goes off the deep end. So for me, I've looked into terminating parental rights, and it's something I've got to look into more because they won't do it unless I marry somebody and have them adopt her, which to me is ridiculous. The other thing is just moving out of the area completely, moving out of the state and moving as far away as I can. Part of the Safe at Home program, I think I can actually change my name. And I mean, it's been really difficult on me because I had to leave a job. I've had to leave friends behind. I mean, I sold my house. I've gotten rid of my cars. I sold my house while it was damaged. I mean, I took a huge pay cut on what I should have made because literally somebody drove a car through the garage. So my next step is just continuing to try and keep us safe, and it's trying to figure out how I can do that. And it's probably going to end up just putting tons of room in between that he can't access me at all.
What advice do you have for other people in your situation?
Being honest with people, even though it seems shameful for some reason to talk about, it's like you need to talk about it and you need not to hide it because, so many women, they never recover from this. They don't come back from it. I mean, women are killed every day by their partners, and it's just, I'd say my biggest thing is just get out, protect yourself, protect your kids. There's programs. And I mean, I was fortunate enough to be financially able to get myself hotel rooms to get out of the area to rent a place while I owned another place. But I mean, there's, Safe at Home. I mean, a safe house. I mean, they're really great things for women out there that are in these abusive relationships. And I would say just get out while you can and find all the resources you can and use them because, I mean, it's frightening. And at the time, I was so isolated in my relationship already that it was more isolating, than I've ever been. I mean, this time in my life is so isolating. I will not be broken. And, I'm going to come through the other end of this. And part of what I want to do, eventually is become a victim advocate for women because, while the police didn't do much for me, the DA's office didn't do much, I had a really great victim advocate that just pushed. And she was that squeaky wheel that really got things done. And I would say, find a victim advocate if you're going through these things because they are the ones that will ultimately get things done. Because the police department, a lot of times they want to go out after different crimes. Your crime isn't big enough for us and it's fine. You'll deal with it, but it's not fine. Find people that will help. Lean on family if you need to. Lean on friends. I mean, the people that I stayed with were girlfriends that I didn't even know that well that opened their homes to me, So there's people out there. Part of me telling my story is to get it out there because I think it needs to be told because this is just so overlooked. But at the same time, I'm terrified of him hearing it and how it will infuriate him and the aggression that will build from it. I mean, I'm terrified, but at the same time, I need to stand up at some point and take that back and say, no, no more. And I still got that 12 gauge. He comes through this house. And I've learned how to use it now.
Shelly, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. If anyone out there is in need of help or is a victim of stalking, please reach out. You can find a list of resources on our Instagram at StrictlyStalkingPod.
You can watch our episodes at youtube.com/strictlystalking.
And now we're on Patreon, where you can sign up for exclusive bonus episodes, live chat sessions, and check out show merchandise. Just go to patreon.com/strictlystalking.
And we'd like to thank our latest Patreon members, Shira, Megan, Samantha, and Peyton. Thank you so much for your support. And now here's a clip of an exclusive bonus episode available only on patreon.com/strictlystalking.
I was trying to fight back, and I just felt all insulted and how dare you talk about my kids. So the things that I would react to are the things that she'd be like, that's a trigger for Wendy. Let me talk about her kids. She started calling me Susan Smith, the child killer, because she's like, oh, her kids are important to her. I bet you she can't even raise her kids. I bet you her husband doesn't even let, the kids be alone with her.
I'm Jake Deptula.
And I'm Jaimie Beebe. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Strictly Stalking.